I am good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, can we take a seat, please? Wonderful. Welcome back to the afternoon. Hope you've had a nice lunch and some networking and a chance to go and have a look around some of the stands and some of the amazing things that's going on downstairs, especially the serious games. I'm going to remind everybody to vote. Tomorrow, the judging begins on the serious games. And also, there's one other thing. We're doing a best exhibit in show this year. The exhibitors don't know this yet. So if there's an exhibit that you think is really good, really engaging, let them know on the front desk. Mia's is looking up there now. That's embarrassing. And we will be presenting the Best Exhibit Award in the show at the end of the week. So I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to somebody who's a fantastic person, adventurer, firefighter, all-round goddess, quite frankly, and she's going to expand on that now. Georgina Gilbert, firefighter extraordinaire. Would you come up, please? George is going to chair your session for you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Tess, thank you once again for inviting me along to chair this year. In the past 4 years, myself and other members of the Antarctic Fire Angels, that's my team name, were invited to come along and speak at the DSET events every year. They were our sponsor, one of our sponsored partners, so we're very, very lucky and privileged position to be able to do that. And now we've actually completed our Antarctic challenge. We returned 5 months ago in January, having skied 1,230 kilometres from Union Glacier to the South Pole. Whoop. It was just a team of two of us, myself and Rebecca Oberschnell-Rowe, who is unfortunately in work today, so she can't come. She's actually a real firefighter, whereas I feel like I'm part-time at the moment. So we pioneered a new route as well. So no one's ever skied from Union Glacier down to the grounding line of Constellation Inlet, and then from Constellation Inlet up to the South Pole. So we pioneered a new route as well. Most of that was because we couldn't afford the flight to get to Hercules Inlet, but that's another story altogether. So as Tess alluded to, I'm a firefighter. I've been a firefighter for 26 years now, and probably long enough to know better to come and do these things whenever Tess asked me to come and do these things. But I absolutely adore my job. I wouldn't do anything else. And again, it gives me the opportunity to come and do these things and also represent the blue light community, which I know that Tess is trying to broaden the aspect at DSET as well. So without further ado, I introduce the first speaker, and that is Mr. Richard Gordon, MBE, Bournemouth University.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for letting me join you today. I think this session really is an opportunity for people in academia, obviously, but also in the blue light services, people who are responders or people who are thinking about risk reduction, to say a few words in the forum of simulation. And I think this is actually a wonderful opportunity. I've put myself a little title there, simulations that enhance resilience, not just in the United Kingdom. I'm thinking actually also overseas. Our work at Bournemouth University is very much a global thing. So my first point of context is this. I think that what we're talking about today and the use of simulation and what we put into our simulation is about preparing the next generation. It's not just about us having lots of fun with new technology. It's actually preparing the next generation for the disasters and hazards which are growing globally. And here's the first point. Some of our best people are retiring early, and we're losing their knowledge, we're losing their experience, we're losing the ideas that they've got. They're just walking out the door because for some reason we don't have a good system of capturing people's knowledge before they leave. We just wave them goodbye, pay their pension, and that's it, they've gone. And on top of that, we know not only have people disappeared with lots and lots of ideas, we know that building up in our cupboards, in our databases, in our offices, are reports of recent disasters with lessons which have been identified, and there they sit. We're not using them. We're not turning them into something of any practical use. And a third point, which is something I found particularly important when working overseas, is a pathological fear of exercises. People will do a drill, because you tell me when it's going to happen, what's going to happen, and what you expect me to do. I'm happy with that. I don't like the idea of an exercise which I don't know what the scenario is. I don't know what I'll be expected to do because I might fail. And so in terms of context, we need to prepare a generation to learn from people who've passed on. I don't mean have died, but have moved on to other careers, to learn from the many lessons that are being published on a regular basis. And I just want to highlight the amazing work the Emergency Planning College in Easingwold are doing now in creating this lessons learned digest and pushing it around. And in promoting the use of simulation for exercises, not drills, but to test people's planning, their communication, and their understanding. Now, many of you will know the resilience cycle, which the United Kingdom came up with years ago, recently updated, I hasten to add, because they said, hang on a minute, we don't just go assess, prevent, prepare, respond. After we have prepared, what we should surely be doing is validating and assuring that our preparations will work. And that's the first point of a simulation. Let's simulate something to see if our plans and our preparations work. And then the second one they've added here is after we've responded and we've recovered, well, what are those lessons that we've learned? Can we now turn those lessons into simulations so that we can subsequently improve? Over the recent months, we've been actually putting this into practice through a academically funded project through the Regional Innovation Fund called BRICS, Building Resilience in Crisis Situations. And we focused on the senior leadership teams of public and privately owned companies and agencies. And what we were trying to do was to see how well a senior leadership team who are recruited with CVs that say they're an excellent finance officer, they're excellent HR officer, they're an excellent operations manager. Well, how well do they transit from those day roles into a crisis management team? And do they know what their roles are when there's a crisis management team required? And so we used some simulation software, we generated a whole series of scenarios, and we put them through it. And often I would ask them, so what do you think your strengths are before we start? They say communication. We're really, really good in communication as a senior leadership team. At the end of the exercise, when you ask them, what do you think was a significant weakness that came out of that? They said communication. Nobody was telling me what they were doing. So the first communication means we actually like each other. We get on really well. But in terms of so what the simulation showed was during a crisis, we don't actually talk to each other and tell each other what we're doing or inform each other of information that the other person may need. So common issues, we find that simulation can really help with, particularly in developing resilience in critical national infrastructure in the UK. One, simulation that tests and encourages people to jointly share information to come to a joint understanding. Fundamental, coming to joint understanding. Secondly, making joint decisions which are recorded, not only what was said, but when it was said, how long after the information was received. How long did it take to come to that joint decision? Why did it take so long? What were you being diverted by something else? And then the third area of testing through simulation is strategic communication. What are you now saying upwards to your shareholders, outwards to the community, broader to the emergency services, or outwards to government and so on? What are those three areas? So understand, communicate, and decide and communicate. So three things I think we learned from running these simulations with these companies. First of all, senior leaders did not know what their roles were in a crisis. The head of HR of one company came along and I said, why are you here? Well, I'm the head of HR. What's your role? I'm HR. What is your role? I had a colleague once who literally sent somebody out of the room. He said, sorry, if you haven't got a role, go. But I am a very senior member of the team. You haven't got a role. What is the role that we should have? It should be recognized, understood, and individually developed. And if you've got somebody who can back you up, then bring that person along. And your own systems and procedures to develop your role absolutely needs to be practiced. Secondly, we need to practice our reporting, capturing the decisions and making sure that those decisions are getting pushed out to the wider stakeholders. I'm going to come back to the wider stakeholders point in a moment. And also identifying through an exercise decisions which are made, which are innovative. They show a new perspective. Because if we want to learn from the reports that we have been gathering, and we want to somehow capture an essence of that report in an inject to see how different people may respond, I'm really interested to know if someone comes up with an innovative solution to that particular problem. And then my final point on common issues is resourcing. How long do we need to set aside for exercises? When we talked to the senior leadership teams, we said, we'd like to run an exercise for you. They panicked and said, we haven't got time. We just don't have time to do exercise. We're a busy company. Well, how long do you think you need? Well, we don't know. A day, 2 days? We said, would an hour be okay? Yes, we can do an hour. So the exercises were 1 hour. And it was amazing how much was able to be achieved in 60 minutes of injects, of common understanding, decision-making and communication. 60 minutes. And I know major airlines now do this. They add on an hour to their regular senior leadership team meeting. They say they've done their agenda. Okay, actually 45 minutes, we'll stay on. We're going to run a scenario. Quickly run a scenario. What decisions, your role, your role, your role. What decisions are you making? And therefore, what are we going to do? How are we communicating? So why am I talking to a group of military people here? Because I believe the military and the emergency services have an amazing role in this. And what we want to try and recommend to you are ideas of what sort of web-based platforms can you see here today that could help you do what I'm saying, to work with critical national infrastructure, to work with government agencies in a joint way. For absolutely correct reasons, many simulation systems that we are seeing are locked down and they are secure, and they need to be secure because we are carrying out military doctrine and military ideas. But we need to think also about simulation software which can be brought across multiple agencies and multiple people. Anyone can join. And that way we can have multiple exercises, repeat those exercises, learn from them, revise them, and repeat. And my other point is that people should be able to do this with any device at all. We do a lot of our work with agencies and organizations overseas, and they do not have the money that you are demonstrating is available here today. But they can turn up with a good phone or an iPad. So let's have platforms that can work with those. The military understand how to create a main event list. I've worked in lots of countries and I've talked to people and say, do you know how to write exercises? Yes, they say. But when I ask them to do it, I discover they can't. What they thought they meant by, yes, I know how to write exercises. I know how to take the exercise that was run last year out of the drawer, change the date to this year, and then run it. That isn't writing an exercise. That's repeating an exercise with your name and address and telephone number on the top of it. What we need are people who can take a blank sheet of paper, take a series of lessons which have been identified, reimagine those lessons which have been re-identified in a new scenario and create a main event list. Military exercise writers, emergency services exercise writers, you know how to do that. You can create main event lists. And I think what we're looking for is a new generation of platforms that can be done using iPhones, phones, tablets, anything, any kind of bring your own device, so we can have wider and wider stakeholders. Each time we run the exercise, we could say to ourselves, actually, that was good, but it would be better if we'd had them and them as part of the exercise. Let's rerun the exercise, but include these other people as well. And these main event lists lead us to think about all kinds of innovation in terms of the injects. And looking at the software that's going on in this building, I'm seeing this. Emails, text messages, social media, very powerful inject, written notes, telephone calls coming through, walkie-talkie messages coming through. This is what we need. This is the realism of the noise of the situation. And then we're looking to see the senior leadership teams of critical national infrastructure saying, what's our common understanding? What have we learned from this particular situation? So finally, some thoughts about collaborating going forward. Maybe this will trigger some questions at the end of our session here. Let's exploit AI. Everyone's going to say that, but I found it fascinating to take 6 or 8 reports and then to throw them into Chat PDF and say, what are the key lessons that have been emerged from that? I then take those key lessons, I put them into another part of ChatGPT and say, write me some scenarios which would test those particular injects. Very quickly, you can get the nuts and bolts of some ideas for a scenario, but then let's start writing those scenarios and those injects. We've got to build libraries of main event lists. We need them and share them across between police and the fire service and the ambulance service, across the military, local government and local resilience forums. We need literally libraries of exercises which we can share with one another. I would go even further. You could probably even trade them with one another. I have an exercise, I'll sell it to you. You can have an exercise to me. And let's identify innovation, but let's also identify those problems that seem to persist. We tend to call them single points of failure. And let's go on identifying those wider stakeholders who we can bring on to our exercises and our simulations. I think that's enough from me. Thank you very much for your attention, but hopefully that's given you some ideas to think about as we go into this session.
Thank you, Richard. Very insightful there. I think you had me on the first line there. We said best people retire early. And a simulation can stop that knowledge train. That can only be a good thing. Thank you very much. Next up now is Professor Richard Teeuw of University of Portsmouth.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me through for this session. I'd just like to talk a little bit about some of the activities that we are carrying out at the University of Portsmouth in the field of disaster risk management and with regard to critical infrastructure. I'm a professor of geoinformatics and disaster risk reduction. I'll talk a bit later about what that entails. Co-director of a new centre of excellence that we've got at Portsmouth for defence, risk and resilience. We've realised the overlap between those sectors. A lot of the technologies that we're using for targeting areas which are either hazards or vulnerable features or exposed areas or areas of particular risk can overlap, and we're particularly interested in civilian military interaction as well in response to major emergencies and disasters. I'm co-leader of a master's course on crisis and disaster management, and I also lecture on a sister master's course that our business school run on risk, crisis and resilience management, which tends to focus more on organizational risk and business continuity. Outside of the university, I'm the secretary of a professional practice group of the Royal Geographical Society in disaster risk management. What I want to do is just present a few case studies from overseas rather than UK, because Richard's just spoken a lot about the UK, and I know the Ordnance Survey speaker following after me is going to be talking about UK examples as well. So this will be uses of geoinformatic data, i.e. from satellites, drones and phones for disaster risk management and infrastructure resilience. Now, geoinformatics, what is it? Lots of things. Basically, it's data which has got a geographical basis to it. It's got longitude, latitude coordinates that we can link to. It could be satellite imagery. It could be drone imagery. It could be the laser scanning data collected by aerial surveys. It can also potentially be spectral scanning to determine the nature of materials down on the ground. The ways in which we're using this and have used it over the last 10 or 20 years at Portsmouth tend to be primarily for disaster preparedness, determining what are the major hazards, what are the main areas of vulnerability and risk that are facing a particular location. Social environmental disasters. This is a case study from a project we had in Colombia a few years ago, looking at areas of illegal gold mining in rainforest that is nearly permanently covered with cloud. Therefore, it's difficult to detect anything using conventional visible infrared remote sensing. So we relied on radar for that. And the image there is showing in the image to the right of the main aerial photograph there is showing areas where we've color-coded areas of rainforest, which is the gray area, which has then been chopped down, and then dredges have come in to mine that area, and the area of floods, which is the black area. And we can then see where the operations were, what they were doing, when they were doing it, and that information can then go through to the Ombudsman of the Columbia government to take action on that. The other areas then, those tend to be larger areas, perhaps less detail. We're looking at tens of meters per pixel rather than centimeters per pixel, and we've got lots of time then to do that work. The other activities we're very involved with are disaster response, and then it's a totally different time frame. We've got to respond very, very quickly. The time frame is very short, probably in the order of only 48 hours to respond before many of the potential casualties may well become fatalities. For that, we're using daily satellite imagery from the likes of Planet, also some of the daily radar imagery that's now available. The image there that you can see in the top center is a damage post Cyclone Harold, which hit Vanuatu a few years ago. And this was a study of critical transport infrastructure. And you can see there's a bridge going over a river valley there. This is before and after that bridge was taken out. Therefore, that information was passed back to the UN, who were coordinating the response operations and could choose different routes for the supply of the humanitarian aid. The color photograph there is actually a crocodile. It was in Mozambique. This was work with the World Food Programme, and we wanted to see whether we could detect crocodiles out of the water. Yes, in the water, they are very, very difficult. The problem is they were eating some of the drone operators, the spotter. If they didn't have a spotter, you'd be finding it's behind you. This was in Sudan where this happened. So they are an extra hazard on top of the snakes and things during flood situations when you're trying to do rapid reconnaissance and pick out the areas which are most in need of support in evacuation. We also work with phone data, and we put a lot of that information together with phone apps and with LiDAR data and with drone photography to come up with digital twins. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And that's then mainly geared up towards climate change. How do you build more resilient communities, particularly in the Caribbean in this case? And then we do simulation exercises. As Richard said, these are events that we do. They're live events. Maximum over 3 days and 2 nights. We want our students in particular to experience what it's like being on a rota during the night when things are happening. This involves local organisations. They tend to be multi-agency, and it allows the organisations taking part to then test their procedures and protocols. They were very big before COVID. COVID hit them quite severely, but we're rebuilding them bit by bit. So if you would like to test out simulations in a coastal setting, we've got plenty of experience down at Portsmouth to do that. We're also testing new technologies, things such as infrared scanners on drones and nighttime visualization of features on the ground, whatever. We've got a format in which we could fit in different organizations who want to test technologies or procedures and protocols. Here's a case study from just a few years ago from the South Pacific, the islands of Vanuatu, Fiji and the Solomon Islands. This was funded by the UK Space Agency, and we were asked to, along with a large consortium, to come up with ways of using satellite imagery to improve the resilience of these islands to climate change, bigger storms, more frequent storms in particular. It took us a long time to process the satellite imagery by more traditional methods, but we've teamed up a lot now with colleagues in the university who are astrophysicists. They do a lot of big data analysis, and we work with them, and very quickly they turned our data on its head and produced ways of then mapping the coastal bathymetry very rapidly, as well as incorporating the local terrain elevation models into that data, so that we were mapping within just a few days, in effect, over 1,400 islands across those archipelago states. When we got that information, you can see here the main island of Fiji. The colour coding off the coast shows you the depth of the water. It's a particular problem in a tsunami or a storm surge if you've got a very gentle bench off that coast. So those communities along the coast are particularly at risk. We then pulled in information from OpenStreetMap to map the roads and the rivers. And then we were looking at pinch points where roads are crossing streams, bridges might get damaged, roads might get cut off. And this was really for preparedness mapping. Should there be another cyclone coming through, which particular communities might be more likely to be cut off than others? Which ones needed to prepare better? We did a lot of work. We do a lot of work in the Caribbean. Sorry, this is a bit out of skew with the way the slides formatted here. But after Hurricane Maria, the British government paid for a team of our scientists and also University of London scientists to go out and review the damage. And that was a case then of understanding what those risks were. The bridges in this case often became hazard accelerators or as hazard enhancers because they became dams and more debris and water piled up behind the bridges until they collapsed. And then we had an even bigger problem for the villages downriver, which were often swept away. So that was then used as guidance for Build Back Better, better designs, better materials, better building codes, but also finding better locations for many of these features. And the final example I wanted to give you is one that we've been doing recently in conjunction with an insurance company, using a lot of the methods that we've developed in these other countries. And this is using globally available elevation models, 11 meter pixels in this case, using the study of geomorphology to then figure out which areas are going to be most likely to get flooded or get landslides, how that will affect farms and the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure to those farms. So terrain and infrastructure risk analysis using machine learning. We also use that machine learning for that farming district, which is a coffee growing area, to look back over 20 odd years and see how susceptible are the farms within this area to extreme weather events. The yellowish areas in this assessment of the data over time are when there was a drought. The brown areas when there were wildfires. The blue areas were when there were floods. They often link in with El Nino and La Nina events. The final part of this system, after we've assessed the levels of risk for each farm, which the insurance company then uses to set the insurance premiums, the level of risk and what they'll pay to cover, is to have a mobile phone app, which each of the farmers in the cooperative that have signed up to this would then use to photograph their farm, their fields, before anything happens. And then when they're actually affected by a disaster, they then photograph the damaged crops or the damaged infrastructure. You then have GPS located timestamp photographs, which are then linked with the daily satellite imagery. That's parametric insurance. And if the level of damage is then automatically assessed to be over 80%, there's a payout automatically, which is very important for smallholder farmers because they've got very limited financial resources. They can therefore recover, and their livelihoods are in a good place should there be another hazard come along that might affect them. So it's a particularly rapid, low-cost system, but it builds on the technologies and the methods we've been developing over the last few years. So that says thank you. Any questions? I think we'll leave them till later, but thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for that quite thought-provoking point of view on disaster response there. It's diverse use of reconnaissance. It's really got me. The blue light sector, it's quite a futuristic concept, but nonetheless potentially important investment that I think in the blue light sector we potentially have to make. So especially as we're experiencing more and more natural disasters on our own and within the UK at the moment. So thank you very much. So just introducing the next speaker is Chief Fire Officer Neil Odin at Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you very much. And I should say, first of all, I'm sorry about the photograph, but I'm not here on behalf of the Fire and Rescue Service, actually. I'm here as the Local Resilience Forum Chair. And albeit the day job is running a Fire and Rescue Service in Hampshire and Isle of Wight, I'm really here to talk about the role of the Resilience Forum in reference to today's theme. So first of all, kind of audience participation. Who's heard of a Local Resilience Forum before? Thank you. That's a good half of the audience. So, okay, I'll start with that because it's important to know the audience. So, essentially, the Local Resilience Forum is described within the Civil Contingencies Act in the UK. And the idea of a forum, it's not a statutory body itself, but it's made up of statutory organisations that have a direct duty under that act to prepare, plan, and respond to emergencies. So, the forum is a kind of coordinating body that plans and prepares before the event. Once the event takes place, that's normally a strategic coordinating group that come together and coordinate for civil contingencies and things happening on the ground. So there's a kind of response phase, if you like. Now, in Hampshire, I'm the chair of the Local Resilience Forum. I happen to have also had the joy of being the SCG, the coordinating group chair for COVID-19 and for EU exit. I don't know what I did wrong for that, but nonetheless, I did get both of those roles to help coordinate all the emergency services and local authorities, Cat 1 responders, and the Cat 2s, the volunteers and other services like water companies and others. So that's the basics of the LRF. Now, here's a lovely picture of us in performance. Now, when you go to the Emergency Planning College or somewhere else, they'll always tell you, or would have told you for sure, that you cannot run an SCG, a coordinating group, virtually. It cannot be done. It should not be done. Now, clearly, COVID meant we couldn't get together because we're all spread COVID to each other. So imagine if you're trying to simulate how organisations would respond during a major incident. You'd simulate that they're going to get together in a room and talk about things and do a gold command thing and do the normal kind of command structures you either see on the telly or you practice time and time and time again. Now, a simulation would never pick up the fact you're going to have a pandemic, which means you can't be within 2 meters of each other. You certainly can't be in the same room together. And it's going to be really difficult to converse in a way that would be normal. So this is what actually happened. And this country now is very much aware you can really successfully run coordinating groups online using Teams, Zoom, whatever you choose. It's very doable. But there's a phrase I want to give you, which I come back to. You don't learn to dance on a way to the ball. And that's a phrase which actually the Chief Constable at the time sort of used in passing during some of the early training we did. And it really stuck as a concept. The idea of you can do this on a Teams call or other call if you know each other. It's transactional like this, it's not relationship. And so a word of warning about any simulation you ever create or any plan you put together, it will rely on your trust and your relationship with each other. And so I'll come back to this sort of theme in a second. So on this call, 46 Cat 1 responders and various others, my job was to convene them, not to be in charge of them. However much I'd like to try and do that, there was no chance that's going to happen. Each individual organisation has its own sovereignty, has its own rights and responsibilities and accountabilities. My job is to convene them around the same problem. COVID-19 was a great example where we didn't have a reasonable worst case because it was super secret. How many people are going to die during COVID-19? As you can imagine, a very sensitive question to answer early on, because no one knew for sure, but even trying to estimate that was incredibly sensitive. And so they didn't want to share with all the LRFs across the country. Also, outside of COVID-19, I remember when CNI, as a critical national infrastructure, first came along as a concept. So please, LRFs, we need you to protect CNI, please. You must protect CNI at all costs. No problem at all. Where are they? We can't tell you that, it's a secret. So there's kind of this dichotomy sometimes you find in this world of security, secrecy, and planning and pre-planning. So that's all moved on after a long way, but we've got much better at it now. We've got much more used to the fact you can share. In fact, it's important you do if you're going to make any difference. So my references today, partly around COVID-19 as an example. Now, I know you've probably all heard lots about COVID-19 over the last few years, but I only draw it out because it's a great example where if you simulate some of this stuff, because COVID-19 or pandemic flu was always the top right-hand corner of our risk analysis, and it was across the country. If you simulated it like we did time and time again, you'd have never believed you'd have the army in running test centres. You'd have, I personally worked with a fantastic brigadier down in my headquarters, and you had an army team coming in one end from government, centrally commanded, and an army team coming out locally commanded, sometimes doing that with each other, trying to create a mortuary and a testing centre at the same place. Not a good look when you're in the queue, which queue you want to go in, but it's when you actually start thinking about the impact on the ground where you need to have really good coordinating, and it need to be decided where it's coordinated from. Where we realise as a country, coordinating from the top, as in government, COBRA, and coordinating from the bottom, as in localities, does not work as a concept. You can't coordinate the same thing from different places. You can make strategic directional decisions from the top, and you can make coordinating local decisions from the bottom. That's something we realised, and is now very much featured in our learning across the new frameworks as they come through. Who'd have guessed also police and fire teams would be proning very vulnerable people in the A&E team, in the A&E facilities and hospitals. You wouldn't have created that, and the army were as well. You just wouldn't have thought about that as a concept. So sometimes the learning to dance part is about learning to create new options in front of you, not go into the book and say, what do we do in these circumstances? The more often we can think freely about the options and freedoms to create new solutions, the more likely we are to succeed. The danger comes for us all is when we start to simulate things that we know. If you simulate COVID-19 today, you'd have a very different simulation than you'd have done 5 years ago, because we've been through it once already. We've learned lots, and so we've seen it again. Next time it'll be very different again. We don't get the chance to run the same thing twice. Someone once said to me when I joined the fire service, there's no one single fire that's the same as another. And that is true for most of the things that we ever face. I'm sure our military colleagues will say the same thing about any conflict or anything else. They're all very different for different reasons. So how do we look at risk? So simulation is a great thing for risk. You can start playing out the factors. You can start computer modeling things. And we've seen some fantastic tools our colleagues have talked about already in terms of flooding. What I'm more focused on often over the years is the social science part of this. How do you know how much that risk is going to affect the people? And I can remember some flooding that occurred once in one of the cities, small cities in my area, the ancient kingdom of Wessex in Winchester, where there was a vulnerable group of people that are going to be affected by flooding. And we decided as a group, let's get out the most vulnerable. Let's get out the non-mobile people. Great, let's do that. Where are they? Don't know. So there's a great example. Someone in the room knew because they were the medical teams or the NHS or GPs. So we've all got the data, just we weren't sharing very well. And over the years, we've developed new ways of discovering not only how you map the risk, as in know the risk, but then you actually apply it on the ground geographically. That's where our friends at OS and others really help us do that and say, how do you actually apply that information you now know on the ground as you can see it? And as the phrase goes in OS, I'm going to steal your thunder now, but everything happens somewhere. I love that phrase. Okay, so risk often is a matrix. Sometimes it's a dial. Sometimes it's a game. And there's the risk game you may have come across. Talks about control your continents to get reinforcements. Watch their borders for attack. Build armies on the border to defend. That's the game of risk. And I translate that into the LRF language. So we build alliances across the area. We watch their horizons for threat, each individual sovereign agency. We build capacity and knowledge to deal with or mitigate threat. And that's really, the game of risk turns into real life. It is about actually building your capacity now in terms of human capacity, relationship capacity, maybe facilities or resources, but it's more than that than just resources. It's not just money. It's being able to talk to someone that you know can help. So what we actually do, this monster of a document, the National Security Risk Assessment, has an appendix of 3,100 pages to chew through in terms of reasonable worst case. So there's a lot of analysis that goes on in the background to work out what might happen, what could possibly go wrong, and what we might do about it. So in my area, we take 111 of these, which are applicable to us in our area, because some of them you go, that doesn't really apply to us, but there's ones across the range like space weather. Of course, that's applicable to us all, but what's the impact of space weather? Sounds pretty outlandish, but it's a really important issue for us to keep an eye on. So this is the stuff that we worry about. And we map it like this. And we try to simulate what these look like. Now, you'll appreciate, I don't expect to read those, that they're in codes. So, but we do publish this information because, you know, more and more seriously now, we need to make sure our communities are aware of the risks that they face. We're not facing it for them, we're facing it with them. How do we engage them into making it safer? So R79 right at the top there in the middle is infectious diseases, Ebola, etc., etc., etc. The one we're all very used to, R78, is the pandemic. So right at the top still, big risk, big likelihood. So those things still occupy our minds, and we feel rather well practiced than we wanted to be in terms of how we might respond to some of those things. But there's still lots waiting to catch us out, and you can't think of everything. What we are always trying to do is predict the social impact. So digital twinning, we mentioned already, the idea of digital twinning health data with how you apply that across a series of people in the communities to see how they would respond to pandemic flu again, or Ebola, or some other horrible disease that may come their way. Because we know pandemic flu, for example, affected certain bits of the population much more seriously than others. And so you can map that now. And I can tell you also Fire does the same thing. I can tell you people in my community that are 4 times more likely to die in fire than others by using social deprivation data, obesity data, mobility data. So you can map and you can predict some of this stuff with simulations. Doesn't mean they will, just means they're more likely. Therefore, you can move your resources to make sure you prevent those things happen. So I just want to use this model really. This is I'm in the fire service. We love a bit of prevention because we rush across the fires. We have blue lights in our vehicles. We love all that. That's great fun. But actually, if we've done that, we've failed. It's great fun for firefighters doing it, but it's someone else's worst day ever. And I'll say it to my teams quite a lot. What we're trying to do is prevent that happening in the first place. So you can look at this vase on the table and you go, it's a very expensive Ming vase, this is. And if it falls off, crikey, it's going to be really bad. So what we need to do is plan for that vase to fall off. This is the LRF world. We're going to plan for that vase to fall off. We're going to have a dustpan and brush. Might even put some perhaps padding below it in case it doesn't break so badly. We're going to do all these things, all this plan below the vase. Prevention is, let's just move the vase. Let's move the vase away from the edge of the table or a different table. Let's put it up on a shelf, no one can get near it. That's prevention in its truest sense. How do we prevent it being an issue at all rather than just planning for when it goes wrong? And that's where we try to be in all the work we do across the local resilience forum. It's become quite a new thing now. It's actually in the new resilience framework, the national framework now, to talk about what resilience forums should be doing. Looking at prevention. It's only got a couple of paragraphs at the moment, but there'll be more in the future, let's hope. Because rather than planning for our worst day ever, let's try and stop that worst day ever happening. So the way forward. As I say, the new framework really focuses on a shared understanding of risk sharing, saying to people, this is the risk you face. Yes, you do live in a risky area. Yes, you do live near the sea. And if that tide comes really high, you're in trouble. Now, most people live near the sea know that. But equally, if you live in in the New Forest, if it catches fire, you need to think about what you're going to do because we can't always protect you. Lots of things we need to share that risk with people so they can take some action. Those people who live in high tidal zones know that. Those people who live in deserted areas of the Outer Hebrides know that also. The fire service or the police or the ambulance service isn't going to rush to them. They'd like to, but they can't be there. So they tend to take more care. During fire strikes, I don't know if I mentioned fire strikes, but during fire strikes, we have the lowest number of calls ever because people take more care. And that's really interesting. It's about human nature. No one's coming, so take care. And we don't worry about it. If someone's going to come around the corner, we don't seem to worry about how much we take care. So, and we're out of time, so I just want to race through this part. So, resilience, some thoughts. Resilience is a phrase across the world I think we all just read differently. What does it mean? I love the Australian version because they're pretty straight talking Australians. And they have a reconstruction authority in New South Wales, which just says, look, you built your house in a flood zone. We're going to knock your house down and move you. So they have the authority to do that. Reconstruction authority means we're going to knock your house down and move you. And we've got the authority to do so. That's pretty straight, isn't it? Now, in this country, it's a lot more difficult. So adversity is about, one of those things that any of us can face any day. And we need our communities to really build their understanding of the adversities that they may face. So the more we can inform them, the more likely, and indeed run scenarios, run models that can help them understand what it really means to have a wildfire in their area or a pandemic flu, whatever it may be. So the world over, we're getting better at this and we're learning from each other. And our academic colleagues are really testament to that, to really helping us understand some of the bigger issues. One thing we did realise in the work we did with the communities, we started to realise the key to resilience is not our planning, actually. It's their planning. It's their connectedness. It's their Facebook site that says, well, what are we going to do if the lights go out? What are we going to do if the road gets cut off? What are we going to do if the shop burns down? What are we going to do if it snows? That's the stuff that builds resilience. It's their connectedness, not ours. We can do something. So our job is to make sure they can be as resilient as possible. So we haven't got to come to their aid. That's one of the things that we're absolutely focused on now as a forum. So I was going to use a case study, but I'm going to leave it to my OS colleagues because actually a case study just revolves around really clever mapping and actually using people who can really do this well to understand how we react during something like a water shortage or an outage, which we've had recently. But what I'll finish with is the summary. So let's not learn how to dance on the way to the ball. Let's instead simulate dancing now. So we know how to do it when we have to do it. And if that dance means I know how to get on with people, I know how to convene people around a problem, I know how to discuss a real problem with somebody. I spent longer in my time chairing the SCG during COVID, understanding our version of the reasonable worst case. How many people do we think are going to die in Hampshire and Isle of Wight? And how can we prevent that, rather than what's happening nationally? So we spent longer talking about the problem than the solutions. The solutions come fairly easy once you've decided what the problem actually is. So learning to dance is about knowing you can have those conversations and you're safe in those conversations. You can trust each other. So let's go back to my game. Take a whole continent. So we build strong relationships across the area now, not later. You can simulate those relationships. How well do you know someone? Check your phone. Have you got them on speed dial? I'll say to my team, if the chief constable's not on your phone, you haven't got a relationship with them. If the head of local county council or the Navy, the commodore of the local Navy base or the local army base isn't in your phone, you haven't got a relationship with them. That's the test of how you built those relationships. Check for borders. Be aware of risks. Check with others. What are you worried about? I've got colleagues here from Avon and Somerset at RF. What are they worried about? Am I missing something? Am I not seeing something they are? And lastly, build defences. Support your communities to be resilient before the emergency, not afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, for that. And one can only imagine what it's like being thrust into a virtual gold command meeting. I can only imagine what that would be like. But what's really come through there, this prevention is the overarching discussion there, and actioning that is at the heart of any emergency responder. And what I especially sort of round that off with, just going back into who you've got in your phone book, is that communication is not a dirty word, and I think we can all take that forward. Thank you. So moving on to the next speaker is Dr. Danny Hyam of the Ordnance Survey.
Hello, I'm Danny from Ordnance Survey, and I work in a team called Consultancy and Technical Services. So, emergency mapping and how we use it. So, that's roughly what I'm going to go through. What is mapping for emergencies? What does it include, etc., etc. So, I'll skip over that. Just briefly explain to this. So, I work in a team that supports government. There is a contract we have with government called the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement. And as part of that, there's a thing called Mapping for Emergencies, which is available to all Cat 1 and Cat 2 responders in this country. So rather than going into that detail, that's kind of the background as to where it is. It's kind of a contractual obligation we have with government, but it's been going on for a very long time, and we've been doing a lot of different things with that over the years. So what is Mapping for Emergencies? It is a service that you call, it's a phone number, and then people are then on call at Ordnance Survey. I went off call last night at 5 o'clock. Why I'm always on call when I do these things, I don't know why. Anyway, so it's aimed at Cat 1 and Cat 2 responders, 24-hour, 24/7, 365. And I've got a slide telling you in a minute what it's about. But we can do all kinds of different outputs and all kinds of different mapping for people. So what it includes, so what you've got there is a picture of a load of OS data. And basically, we will give people whatever they need, whether you're licensed for it or not at that time. Because basically, we don't want to be the thing that gets in the way, that stops you from responding to whatever your emergency is. Going, oh, I'm sorry, we can't give you that. You're not licensed for it. So just take it and we'll apologise afterwards. You also get access to a whole bunch of Herberts at the bottom. And if you can spot me in there, please tell me, because I am in there. Wearing an all-black shirt like I normally do. I haven't got it on today. So you also get access to all of us. So we as a team will go out and deploy to people. We haven't had to deploy for a while. COVID got in the way. People didn't want us to turn up. So a lot of stuff is now done virtually. But you get access to us as people. So this is a list of kind of examples of stuff that we've responded to over the years. This is where I'm going to get you to actually shout out some answers to me. So image at the bottom right. What's the event? Lockerbie bombing. When was it? Not 82. 88, thank you. So that was, as far as we're concerned, that was our first ever mapping for emergency. We were asked for really detailed mapping so that they could then plot where all the bits of wreckage was all over the floor. Top right, what event was that? Machynlleth in Wales. April Jones. Yes, you know that. Right. Okay, so April Jones. Again, we provided a load of those types of maps for people because they wanted to give them out to all the volunteers that came forward. It's like, right, this is the area you're going to do. Can you do that square? Can you go and search that square? So they kind of gave them out to all the volunteers. So there's a whole list of things there that are various things that we've kind of responded to over the years in different examples. So when do you trigger it? Is it an emergency? Yes. Is it a must or a need as opposed to a should have or nice to have? And the main thing is it something that you don't have the capacity or capability to do? So basically, we as a service are there as a kind of surge capacity, as in you run out of people. So if you look at something like the flooding 10 years ago in Somerset Levels and in Thames, Environment Agency had literally run out of people. They were all on the ground doing stuff. They had nobody left to do mapping. That's when they called us. That sort of thing. And then there's the phone number. So what it's not is we're not there to replace the GIS capability that you already got. We're not a kind of on-tap GIS team, but we are there as a kind of, we can help you when things kind of get sticky. So some other examples. What's this? Yes, you need to give me the answers. It makes it look like the country's got measles. What's that? Foot and mouth. 2001. Probably the biggest deployment of staff we've ever done. We deployed about 50 odd people, went out on the ground. Everything from mapping stuff on the ground through to stuffing envelopes for DEFRA because all their staff were out on the ground doing stuff. So again, doing all the mapping for them, that went on. And the thing is, it went on for months. So we had people deployed out doing stuff for a very long time doing this, looking at where the farms are, which bits are infected, and actually getting that right and getting the mapping right for that was really important, because if you put the dot in the wrong place, then someone else's farm and all their livestock gets killed. So actually getting the mapping right becomes really important. This one, where's this? Somerset Levels and things from 10 years ago. Again, we were asked to do a load of the mapping on behalf of Environment Agency. This one shows again why it's important to get the data right. So we were asked to find out how many addresses were impacted. So if you look at the one on the left, you've got the light blue, which is the one from, that's the Environment Agency 1,000-year flood polygon, or 1,000-year flood polygon. And that one is like 15,000 addresses are impacted. And so, well, that wasn't true. And then you use the dark blue one on the left-hand side, and it makes it look like about 60 properties are impacted. And that's not true either. And so the end one on the right is the kind of stuff where you get the amalgamated stuff from Environment Agency and satellite and everything else. And that's about 600 properties. And that was about right. So actually using the right data gives you the right answers. And if you use the wrong data, you can end up deploying more resources than you think you should, or fewer resources than you think you should. So actually getting the answers right, using mapping to help you get the answers right, is quite important. This one. It's what? Flooding. It is flooding. Named storm. Lancaster lost all its electricity. There was a guy dined out for some years on talking about blackouts in Lancaster. Anyone know the name of the storm? Oh, tumbleweed. Anyone? Storm Desmond? Okay, Storm Desmond. We deployed somebody on the ground. The police had a load of data. The whole lot got lost because it was in the basement. So everything got flooded. Don't put your servers in the basement. So we then deployed and would be able to answer those kind of geographic questions of which roads have been shut off, which areas are flooded, which people can't we get to. Neil mentioned vulnerable people. If you've got a list of addresses, we can map those and turn those into locations, and you can see where all the vulnerable people are. This one, that is a map of Salisbury. Novichok. So we then provided these as big, like A1 plots, 9 A1 plots, so they then stuck up on the wall, so they could then go, this is where we've been, this is where we need to go. So there's all kinds of different outputs we can do. Now, interestingly, there is an organisation in the military called 42 Engineering, who do a very similar role to this from the military point of view. And actually, we coordinate a lot with them, and we kind of help them make sure they've got a load of data for the UK. Obviously, their remit is bigger than UK or GB. Ours is just GB. But actually, we coordinate with them, and they do similar responses. Because when we showed them this, they went, we did that as well, and we did that. This one. Catchy name that the Met Office really don't like. It wasn't Snowmageddon in 2017. It's a year later. Beast from the East. Apparently, the Beast from the East is the name of the wind, not the event, but nobody cares. They all just call it the Beast from the East. This was one of the ones which is arguably the best kind of, we did this and this was the outcome. We got supplied a list of, I'll call them locations is a polite word for it, which were basically transcripts from phone conversations, which kind of sort of gave you a location. Sometimes it actually had an address, sometimes a postcode, sometimes it was just a description of a road. So we then had to try and find them. That's what all the blue dots are on the map. And then we did more detailed things of those. And then the next day, a Chinook went out and took food, fuel, and medicine to all the people who were running out, which were all those locations were. So arguably, from my point of view, having been involved in it, the best kind of, that's what we did. That was the result. This event, 2018, the event that didn't actually go wrong, thankfully. Dam in Derbyshire. Yeah, sorry, it's August 2019. Anyone know the name of it? No, that's not that. No. You maybe forget the name. Whaley Bridge was the town, and again, we were doing stuff looking at the addresses and infrastructure that would have been impacted had it actually burst. So all the red and green dots are all the residential and commercial addresses, and then the other one is looking at things like bridges. An amazing piece of planning. Just in front of the dam is a school. Wouldn't like to ever see what would happen if that actually gone, but that kind of looking for infrastructure that could be impacted by stuff. Then we had COVID-19. We had about 120 requests for data, several of them from Hampshire because we were working with them quite closely. So the bit about learning to dance on the way to the ball, we already had an existing relationship with them, so they contacted us straight away to be able to do this. So things like the Grayson site, which is the second map in on the left, things like mobile phone masks, because people were attacking mobile phone masks, because that's apparently how COVID was being spread by 5G. Crews and masks were being attacked. Looking at gritting routes and whether you could get to the sites, looking at drive times around test centres and whether people could get to them or not, looking at things like pavement width, that kind of stuff. And then we come to Storm Eunice, which was only a couple of years ago now. And this was one where we were asked by the LRF in advance. They knew the storm was coming on the Friday. We got asked on the Wednesday, can you give us all of this critical infrastructure, which is listed on the right-hand side there, as data? Now, one of the questions that we've had in the past is how does the service that we do with mapping for emergencies link in with a system called Resilience Direct, which is run by Cabinet Office. The two things are complementary, not in competition with each other. And actually what you find is with Resilience Direct, you can go so far. It's kind of got mapping capability. You can use so many things with it, but actually you can't do complex queries with it. And we were asked to, can you give us all of this data for our area? So things like bridges, electricity transmission lines, pylons, electricity substations, quite a lot of analysis to get that out. We then push that out in a format that will then go into Resilience Direct, and they can then put it into Resilience Direct and then use it. So the two things work together. That's my last example. Hopefully I'm on time.
Thank you, Danny. I, for one, I had no idea that OS did all of that. So thank you very much for the insight. And I think we all know how important mapping is in absolutely everything, whether you're in a military, domestic world, or blue light community. It's essential, and people love maps or hate maps. But what I think honing in on this expertise is absolutely priceless, especially when it comes to saving lives, prevention, and everything like that. Thank you very much. And on to our final speaker now, Police Sergeant James Williams, a technical skills trainer at the Police National Search Centre.
Hi, good afternoon. As Georgina said, my name's James Williams. I'm a Avon and Somerset Police Sergeant, but I'm seconded to the Police National Search Centre, working at the College of Policing in Rice on Dunsmore and Coventry. So I think this is the first time we've been asked to present here, and I was a little bit concerned that I wouldn't fit in with some of the other presentations we've just seen. However, having seen Danny's presentation, I actually operationally deployed in a search capacity to at least 6 of those jobs. So I'm a little bit more confident now that what I'm about to say is relevant. So the Police National Search Centre, for those of you that don't know, is it's part of the College of Policing, and we effectively license all of the police search activities nationally. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how the College of Policing came to be formed, and obviously some of the services that we deliver to UK policing and other agencies. So we take you back to Brighton 1984. Most of our students that we teach weren't alive when this happened, which I find quite frightening. However, for those of you who do remember it, the IRA tried to murder the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet by placing a long-time delay device in the Grand Hotel in Brighton, where she was staying for the national conference. They were unsuccessful in their objective of murdering her. However, they did kill 5 people and 23 injured, and they were very famously quoted for saying, "Remember, we only have to be lucky once. You have to be lucky all the time." That was obviously a bit of a disaster for the police, because clearly there's a massive security failing. We allowed a bomb to get into a bomber to get so close to effectively our seat of government, and nearly destroyed the sitting government at the time. So needless to say, there was an inquiry and a report, and off the back of that, the Police National Search Centre was formed in conjunction with the military, colleagues from the Royal Engineers, and also the Royal Ulster Constabulary, as was now the PSNI. The idea of that was for the UK mainland police to learn from and develop our own techniques based on the experiences that the IUC and the military had in various different theatres around, and obviously the troubles at the time that are ongoing in Northern Ireland and still are. It's currently staffed by serving police officers, members of the Royal Engineer, 3 members of the Royal Engineer Regiment from DEMS, and also civilian staff who are predominantly either ex-military or police background, and all of whom have experience in operational search in their previous lives. As I already said, we are part of the College of Policing, and our role, we are predominantly a training facility, although we do get involved in advising and offering guidance and support to operational deployments as well, as we'll see a little bit later on in the presentation. Okay, so structure, I won't bore you with details, but the structure, we've got 12 members of operational teaching staff. As I say, most of us are either police officers, ex-police officers, ex-military, or serving Royal Engineers. We're led by a Chief Inspector from Greater Manchester Police, Chief Inspector Mark Sweeney, and overseen by Superintendent Andy Gadd. And we have one administrator that supports us through all of that. So that's the team. We cover training for all 43 police forces nationally. So I think you mentioned April Jones, Danny, beforehand. April Jones was the biggest and remains the biggest UK search operation in this country to date, and officers from every single police force were deployed in that event throughout. I think it was about 2 or 3 months that search went on for. We also delivered training to non-Home Office forces such as British Transport Police, the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, Ministry of Defence Police, Channel Islands and other UK territories. And we also offer training and support to British territories overseas as well, UK territories overseas. Okay, so these are on the screen. I'll go through each one in more detail, but these are the main courses that we deliver. They are all licensed, which means that officers that attend them and are successful have to go through a retraining process every year to keep their skills up together and to make sure that their CPD is current. So we start with the first one. The first one is Initial Missing Person Search Advisor. This is a very new course. We've only delivered one so far. It's been implemented this year. It was a course that we didn't want to deliver because we felt it maybe watered down some of our other skill sets we do, but basically at the request of police forces around the country, there was a demand for it. Missing people are taking up more and more of our time. So this is one that we've actually developed on at the request of the police. So those officers that will be training, that can be any rank, usually operational ranks such as PC right up to inspector. They will be trained and be responsible for planning and organising the initial response to high-risk missing people. Okay, they can take that operational involvement for up to 10 hours of any initial search, which will allow all of the initial inquiries to be done. And obviously, if the search goes on beyond that, then they then have to hand it over to a police search advisor. But their role is to provide initial search advice to strategic and tactical commanders, to senior officers who are investigating the missing person, and to obviously advise in all matters of physical search, i.e. best assets, best location, best timings, etc., etc. So moving on from that then, we will also deliver licensed search officers course. Now every police officer that you see on the telly after any murder or any major incident, hands and knees, black overalls, searching with blue gloves on, they're almost certainly going to be a licensed search officer. They are the ones, they are the doers, they're the ones that are going through the bins, going through all the rubble and picking up all the evidence and gathering all that finite minutiae detail that will get our convictions and get people identified after either, whether it be national disasters or terrorist acts. They get taught, it's a week-long course, and they get taught everything from threat to methods of attack, which is covered by the military. So they get trained to identify both IEDs and component parts of IEDs, and obviously respond accordingly. So actions on a find. They get taught specific techniques for vehicle search, open area search, offensive and defensive building search. So for those that don't know, offensive search would be police kicking in a door, going looking for evidence for a drugs warrant or for crime. A defensive search would be searching for venues such as this in preparation for an event or a visit, a VIP visit, looking for IEDs, etc. Similar techniques, but obviously, one, we're looking for minutiae, tiny SIM card evidence, size evidence. For the other one, we're looking for something a bit more like a viable device, something a bit bigger. They're under a continuous assessment, and they have 2 exams at the end, which they have to pass with an 80% pass rate, and they are subject to relicensing every year, which is carried out in force, obviously with the support of ourselves at the search centre. So for a licensed search officer to operate, they always need to be managed and overseen by a police search advisor, and we also teach the police search advisors course, which is the one we've got currently ongoing up at Brighton. This is a 4-week course. It's usually aimed at officers from PC to inspector rank. Back when I first started doing it, you had to be inspector or above. Over the years, that's been reduced now, and we do have, I would say, about 50% of our pulsers are PCs. However, this is a command role. This is taking ownership, making decisions. It's a role that carries quite a lot of responsibility. Pulsers will act as advisors to senior officers in respect of any low-risk search. So for the non-military amongst you, low risk versus a high-risk search. A high-risk search is any search where we believe there is likely to be a IED or a booby trap, explosive or otherwise. A low-risk search is where there is no reason to believe there is likely to be explosives, a booby trap or otherwise. But basically, that's the 2. If it's a high-risk search, it falls with the military. If it's a low-risk search, it will fall with us initially. We train them to plan searches, control search teams, and obviously make assessments around threat, risk, and what elements, how and where to pitch a search for events, VIP events, military events, etc., etc. Again, they have to undertake annual refresher training, which includes part of that is to take part in the training of LSOs as well. So it's a 2-way process. They have to deliver training to the LSOs as well as manage their own training. Some of the things that they cover: terrorist threat, method of attack, defensive venue search. They have a whole input on threat, vulnerability, and risk, and how to assess that. Appropriate search responses versus proportionality, etc. Planning, actions on a find. The list goes on. I won't read them all out to you, but you can see on the board there is quite a lot of input that they have in there. 50% of the course is covered around CT and is built around CT defensive venue search. The second half of the course is 1 week dedicated to missing people, and the other week is dedicated to crime. That's, for me as an operational pulser, that's a little bit backwards because most of our work is missing people and crime. However, the whole process is built around the CT military process, so it makes sense that builds the bulk of the course, and a lot of those skills are transferable anyway. So it does work, and they come out with a really high standard of work. Oh, I've lost my screen. Can you see it out there? It's gone out as well. Oh, there we go. It's back. See, technology. Don't trust it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the next course that we teach as well is the Counter-Terrorist Security Coordinator course, or SECO as we call it in the police. We love an acronym. This is basically, again, it's more sort of the role sits between Silver Commander and Gold. And it's basically a holistic overview of a whole operation. So, for example, if we were to have the King or another senior member of the royal family come and visit today, there would be a whole security operation around that. The CT SECO would oversee the police element of that security response. So they would liaise with the event organizer, the royal household, the protection officers from RASP, the military, if there were military involved, and they would put together a series of recommendations around the security of that. They are recommendations, and they don't have to. The organisers don't have to accept those recommendations, but ultimately they would be signed off by the Gold Commander, and the SECO would be boots on the ground on the day, overseeing, making sure all of their recommendations were followed and adhered to, and obviously they would be the ones they were being questioned if things went wrong. They will utilise their knowledge to arrange those assets, and obviously look at things like target hardening, reducing vulnerability, and also reducing the risk, bringing it down to an acceptable level. This could be anything from public military events, high-profile ceremonial civic events. Obviously, a lot of those going on in London in recent years. But it can also be applied for things like just everyday crowded spaces. So Bristol City, Ashton Gate Football Stadium on a Saturday match day afternoon, crowded space, loads of people in the street. Could it be vulnerable to terrorist attack? Yeah, absolutely. Would we put a CT SECO in? No, not for every match, but it has been looked at as a series of generic assessments, as has Bristol Rovers and all the other big venues that we have throughout the course. A SECO is appointed by the goal commander, and the goal commander can appoint one for any other event that they think is appropriate. And obviously that's aimed at public safety, usually around crowded spaces, if that happens. So other things that we do at the PNSC, so we support and advise, as I said, forces research. Just to give you some examples of some of the things we've given advice on recently, you'll remember Nicola Bully, who sadly fell in the river in Lancashire. We advised on that. April Jones, we were involved in heavily. The little lad that was recently been recovered following having fallen in the river a few months ago, we gave advice on that. And also Jack O'Sullivan, who you may know is a missing person here in Bristol, who's currently still outstanding, who's believed to have possibly fallen in the water just down the way in the Cumberland Basin. So those are the type of jobs we will get involved in. We also give advice on much smaller, less high-profile jobs, such as if people are doing high-profile warrants locally on things like traveller sites or difficult search elements where there's different elements of risk. We can advise on that. If we can't give advice, we can put them in touch with people, almost act as a conduit to other people nationally that have done similar things. We're responsible for identifying and sharing best practice nationally, as well as also identifying and sharing areas for learning, so where things have not maybe gone so right. We represent search in a variety of different national working groups, and we are responsible for steering national policy around search within the police. We do deliver other training as well, although we don't necessarily license it, and things like ground sign awareness. We do a course on that, which is, I know the military do that very well. It's a military-based course again, but we will deliver it to police officers and personnel on the ground, search and rescue teams, etc., who are out looking for missing people or looking for terrorist hides, etc., etc. We deliver bespoke training to people, so Her Majesty's Coast Guards, who will do an initial search course on that. It's very similar to our IMSA course. Financial Conduct Authority, and also we've more recently done some work for London Fire Brigade around a very bespoke problem that they were having, and we've delivered some training for them around that, which I'm happy to speak to you afterwards if anyone's got any questions on that. One of the other things that we do that people don't recognise that we do maybe is we support overseas territories. So recently we've had deployments out to Montserrat, where we've assisted local police out there looking for a very vulnerable missing elderly person who is believed to be subject to a murder. And also we've deployed out to Anguilla looking to help them look for a firearm that had been used to kill a 14-year-old boy in a gang-related shooting. Sadly, we haven't located the elderly person, but we were lucky enough to find, I say lucky enough, we found the gun, and obviously that's helped them secure a prosecution case to get the suspects convicted, hopefully, when they come to court in due course. I won't ask questions. I think questions will be at the end, but that's me. Yeah, if you want my contact details, are up there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, James. And as much as it's very clear that the role requires an awful lot of compassion as much functionality as well. But what was quite enlightening for me is that the courses that you offer range from PC all the way up to Chief Superintendent, which can only encourage a diverse group of people who operate within that sector. And I think you need diversity in anything that you do. If you're any frontline service, army or anything like that. So that's quite refreshing to know. Thank you for that. If I'd like to invite the speakers up now to take your seat for your Q&A. Okay, do we have any questions from the floor at all? Sorry, there is a mic coming around. Quickly now, quickly.
So, yeah, thank you very much. Very you with regards to, we're seeing a lot of serious gaming within this conference at the moment. So what kind of serious gaming is happening for that critical national infrastructure, making sure that we have plans in place if it exists already, or do you see a role in serious gaming and sort of wargaming to enable you to better plan for those sort of events and crises? To the entire panel, yeah.
So you mean by sort of AI gaming stuff? Is that what you mean? Like computer generated simulations? Is that what you're?
Can be tabletop as well. Any kind of just serious game in general.
So I certainly in my area of expertise, it doesn't necessarily. We haven't used that yet, but I have seen it in other areas such as firearms response. CSI, where you get or like virtual reality crime scene in front of you, and you can interact with things within that domain to train forensic recovery and things like that, identify evidence, all that sort of stuff. So long term, I think there's a role for it. For me personally, I don't think anything beats actual hands-on real life training, particularly when you add in elements, because if it ain't raining, it ain't training, etc., etc. We deploy in the rain, so we need to train in the rain. But it doesn't need to always be like that. So there's definitely a place for it in my operational policing world, and I'm sure there is as well in other areas of policing as well that necessarily I'm not experiencing. So.
Yes, I think first of all, there's on-site exercising and planning. So exercises which mean that the people who are operating within the site of the critical national infrastructure, they need to do this increasingly, and we've watched that happening. I'm not going to mention the site specifically, but in a number of locations where we've worked, not only are there multiple agencies working on those sites, but they're from different countries. They have different maps of the area, different routes, different checkpoints, VCPs. It's chaotic. And so it's really important that they have on-site plans and exercises and simulations just to iron out some of those problems. But as I was trying to say earlier on, then there's the need for the off-site planning. So whatever starts on site spills out to the local resilience forums and to the local community. And so that needs to be exercised as well and practiced. How are we evacuating communities? Where are we sending them? How good are our early warning messages? And these sorts of things need to be gameplayed.
I could just another thought. So as you were talking there, Richard, I was thinking about the resilience of our communities, and that your question really leans into that. So I think the answer for me would be, I'd love to see more, because I think it gives different parts of our society more access to what potentially they could do, what could be done outside of the state, if you like, the state machinery. And so I think the idea of how do you mobilise local communities to do things or prepare or plan beforehand can really only come out when they've thought through or gamed the actual event that they could be facing. So the more we can share with people the realities of what could happen. Let's take space weather, for example. All electricity could be gone temporarily, or all sorts of things you can imagine from that, without scaring people. Just saying, so what happens if? And had you kind of gained that? So I think the answer to the question is not enough currently, and I think that will start to take shape. And certainly for me, this is my first serious gaming conference I've ever been to. So I think many of my community will be the same place as I am, probably going, how do I get more involved in this? How do we use it more? Certainly with our colleagues on this table, I think we'll look to do that more often.
Anybody else? Okay, any more questions from the floor at all? There's the mic. There's the mic on.
I'm happy just to shout
I think there's someone at the front here that enjoys seeing his wife go back and forth. Yeah, thanks.
I imagine most intelligence in a disaster relief situation is through open source means, OSINT. How do your organisations train to trawl through the level of OSINT that you will get in a situation such as that, which is very difficult to replicate outside of such a situation?
I'll have a go at that. So open source is a really, really unique way of doing it, as much as it's there and present and real. And there's lots of companies now I've come across that are looking to scoop all that up for you. And I think that happens probably in intelligence services as well. But real-time access to a bit of software that you can get really good information from. And certainly talking to other agencies like police and others, using that facility, also the information that can come in. I guess like all these things, as an SCD chair, you are sitting there desperate for information, and you're, all the commanders on the ground are desperate for information and making decisions on often scant information in the early stages. The benefit, I guess, when I've sort of stepped into the role is often it's much more matured by then. You're looking for more information always, but you're looking for every single point of contact you can to get information about the reality. Often, though, we've found that the most difficult information to get is predictive information that's reliable. And so if I'll take an example of a very large scale industrial accident. It's often I use this kind of I suppose in an informed way. Is one big bang and then you're almost into recovery. Something's happened. Whereas if you've got a rising tide or an escalating issue like a COVID or like something else, it's much harder to predict what's going to happen next. So often disasters we're used to facing are the big bang moments. I mean, war's a similar thing. It can go on and on and on. And you don't know what's going to happen next. So those sorts of scenarios, you're just desperate for predictive information. That's the harder bit, I think. You can know what's happening now. The really hard thing is interpreting that as to what it's going to mean in the future, because that's the bit where your brain's got to be, not in dealing with the right now, because your team on the ground are doing that.
If it's a major international disaster, then there's a problem with using social media, because it possibly even the European or American disaster, but certainly overseas, there's a problem with the cell phones being down, the internet's down, so there's not actually much traffic for you to tap into, and that can take many days to restore. There are various organizations with the UN who are experimenting with getting various relay systems up, tethered drones, which then carry some form of local Wi-Fi link up, or even balloons, dirigibles that can be deployed locally to allow the local population then to start using their phones, if only to say we're okay or to highlight a problem. So they're probably not as well able to start using social media as it would probably be in somewhere like the UK or in Europe or America, although even those countries can get delays. But there is another source of information that we can get through international charter for major disasters. And once that's activated by the country that's been affected or by the UN, then all of the commercial companies supplying data, and in the commercial sector, it's about 30 centimeter pixel daily, or 2 or 3 times a day that you get the imagery. That becomes freely available to UN agencies and various government agencies that have agreed then to process the data and come up with a map showing the damage to buildings or the areas affected by flooding or whatever the particular disaster is that's taken place. So in that sense, you can get a lot of data provided very, very quickly to give you that situational awareness information relatively quickly.
So from a policing point of view, I don't think you'll be surprised to know that we pretty much have a whole department dedicated to processing intel 24/7, 365, and a number of departments that sit alongside them that process intel information from a number of sources, including open source. I think you asked specifically about training. I've never worked in the intelligence field. However, there are a whole wraith of courses that are available to forces through the College of Policing that, again, are nationally licensed, that will train our operatives, whether it be source handlers or open source analysts or whatever they are. So people, data analysts. We employ all those people across the country to process and assess and evaluate that intel and information. Does that answer your question?
Don't start on in.
Thank you.
I think you're right.
Thanks again for your insights into your respective areas. It's fascinating. Clearly, we're at DSET, and much of the focus is on where technology is going, especially in this area. In your respective fields, how much are you seeing the growth of extended reality being the umbrella for virtual, augmented, or mixed reality technologies, and how is that assisting? And do you see that becoming a stable capability within your areas? Thanks.
First thing is, I'm trying to avoid a sarcastic answer. I work for public service, so local government, so not very quickly, mainly because, and it's not to blame any particular part of our establishments, but the challenge is we almost need this commercial sector or indeed military sector to be developing this stuff so we can go, actually, there's an application we can use. That's often where the facilities we use, certainly in fire and rescue, but even in other aspects, are often derived from higher political tensioned area like counterterrorism or like military applications. And then we sort of piggyback off the back of that. That's just the way things are. And I respect why they're like that, because we can't always invest up front. And I'd like to see more investment. And we had a conversation recently with our Home Office scientific advisor saying, look, we're putting money into discovering about firefight contamination, those sorts of things. Where else would you like to see us spend money? And I said, how about investing in helping us understand how to put fires out? And she sort of laughed at me and said, well, I thought you'd be the expert in that. So I said, well, how much money have you spent helping police officers catch criminals lately? She said, fair point. So it's about investing in the right things, which are politically important to us all.
So just coming back on that question, in my area, sort of picking up really on what Neil's saying, not a lot on augmented reality, and I think that's partly because our target audience are senior decision makers who are, I suppose, in one sense, relying upon people at a layer below them to be playing with augmented reality and throwing up at them requirements for strategic decision making. We're interested in how those strategic decisions are being made and then communicated outwards and downwards. But where the need is huge is at that, what I might call operational tactical level. And I know we're in a military audience and a civilian audience where operational tactical get reversed. But if we think of it as the middle silver level, I think an area of augmented reality from that level downwards is absolutely essential to provide the meat that strategic leadership teams are needing to practice their strategic decision making, or going back to my three little points, the coming to us a common understanding, coming to decisions which have been made together, and then making strategic communications. The need is huge at the level which is at the silver operational level.
Yeah, quite agree with all of that. And just another layer of complexity, if that's a deployment overseas, if there's been a hurricane in the Caribbean, or there's one of the British warships on patrol off the Philippines after a typhoon. You've another layer of complexity then in dealing with the local disaster management agencies as well, and linking with them and trying to, you'll be under their, effectively, you're not going to go in and say, we're taking control. It will be what the local emergency management agency is guiding you and asking you to do. So there's another level that needs to be gamed out, tested out there, really. It's one thing for military civilian to learn how to interoperate and coordinate effectively. There's another level of complexity that can be thrown in if it's an overseas activity as well.
Just to add on that, the bit about the kind of augmented reality, virtual reality, if you're looking at disaster and recovery stuff, the quality of the data you've got is going to be really, really important. So things like, I mean, in the world I've come across, things like looking at where all the pipe work is underground, because you can't see it. So you might want augmented reality to then go, actually, where are all the pipes? But actually, only if you've got that data and you've got access to that data and the people who own it are prepared to let you have it. So actually, it's all well and good to kind of have the technology, but actually in the kind of civilian side of it, it's having the data that you can put into that to make it worth using it and having that good enough quality to make it worthwhile. So I think that's why you're probably not seeing it being taken up in that, because you've not got the kind of infrastructure to kind of share that, use it and show it.
To say thank you very much for that, George. If you actually want to hear more about her actual journey and all of the pain and survival that her and Bex both went through, Bex is joining us this evening, isn't she? Yeah, for drinks and stuff. And we've got a few surprises in the drinks in the Heineken Lounge with Wargaming and loads of wonderful, amazing people, including George and Bex, her, I was going to say partner, but that's partner in crime. So thanks very much again. And thanks, George, for chairing that. Brilliant job.